Have you ever said something simple and suddenly the way she looks at you changes? Not because you tried to impress her, not because you used some clever line, but because, for a moment, she felt something different around you, something real. That shift, it's not luck, and it's not about being smooth. It's about how certain words tap into emotion, quietly but deeply. Before we get into this, if you're someone who wants to understand people better, not just attract them, but actually connect on a deeper level, then you'll probably find this kind of content valuable. So go ahead, like the video and subscribe. Not for me, but so you don't miss the kind of insight most people only learn the hard way. Now, here's the truth most men don't hear. Attraction isn't built through trying harder. It's built through how you make someone feel in your presence. And language, simple, everyday language, plays a much bigger role in that than you think. A lot of men focus on saying the right thing. They rehearse lines. They try to sound confident, funny, impressive. But ironically, that effort often creates distance because it feels performed. Women are extremely sensitive to emotional authenticity, not perfection, authenticity. And the moment something feels scripted, forced, or slightly off, the connection drops. But when something you say feels grounded, calm, and emotionally clear, it does the opposite. It pulls her in. Not because the words are magical, but because of what those words signal. They signal confidence without pressure, presence without neediness, interest without desperation. That's the space where attraction actually grows. Now, the 3 phrases I'm going to share with you aren't pickup lines. They're not tricks. You won't use them to manipulate anyone. And honestly, if that's your intention, they won't work anyway. These phrases work because they come from a certain mindset, a way of seeing yourself and the other person with clarity and respect. And when you say them from that place, something shifts. She feels seen, but not chased. She feels curious, not overwhelmed. She feels safe, but also slightly intrigued. That combination is rare, and rare is what creates attraction. So as we go through this, don't just listen for the words themselves. Pay attention to the energy behind them, because that's the real difference between something that lands and something that falls flat. Let's start with the first phrase and why it works in a way most people completely overlook.
The first phrase is simple, almost too simple, and that's exactly why it works. I like talking to you. Now, before you dismiss this, let me explain what's actually happening underneath those words. Most men either overcomplicate their communication or avoid expressing interest directly. So when a woman meets someone who calmly and naturally acknowledges enjoyment in her presence, it stands out. But here's the key. It's not what you say, it's how and when you say it. This phrase works best when it's not attached to pressure, not used as a way to get something, not said too early, and definitely not repeated to the point it loses meaning. It's most powerful in a moment of natural connection, when the conversation is already flowing and there's a relaxed energy between both of you. Why does it work psychologically? Because it does 3 things at once. First, it communicates clarity. You're not hiding your interest. You're not playing confusing games. You're simply present enough to recognize what you enjoy. Second, it creates emotional grounding. It signals that you're not there to impress or perform. You're there because you genuinely enjoy the interaction. And third, and this is the part most people miss, it creates subtle emotional validation without pressure. Many women are used to conversations where they are either overly pursued or emotionally guarded against. This phrase sits in the middle. It doesn't chase and it doesn't withdraw. It simply acknowledges. And that balance creates curiosity. Now here's where men often get it wrong. They think saying something like this will suddenly win her over. But attraction doesn't work like a switch you turn on. It works like tension that builds slowly over time. So if you say this phrase with expectation, like you're waiting for a reaction, it loses its effect. She will feel the pressure underneath it. But if you say it casually, almost as a passing observation, it lands very differently. It feels honest. And honesty in a relaxed emotional space is surprisingly attractive. There's also something deeper happening here. When you express enjoyment without over-explaining it, you demonstrate emotional self-awareness. You're not analyzing the moment too much. You're simply in it. That is rare. Because most people are either thinking too far ahead or too focused on how they're being perceived. But attraction often happens when someone feels like you're fully present with them, not performing, not chasing, not withdrawing, just there. And that's what makes this phrase powerful. Not the words themselves, but the emotional position behind them. The second phrase is where things start to get more interesting, because now we're not just creating comfort, we're creating curiosity. I feel like you don't tell people everything about yourself. At first glance, this might sound like an observation, but psychologically, it does something deeper. It gently challenges the surface-level version of her personality. And most people, especially in early attraction, are presenting a version of themselves that is slightly controlled. Not fake, just curated. We all do it. It's normal. But when you verbally acknowledge that there might be more beneath the surface, something subtle happens in her mind. She starts thinking. Not in a defensive way, but in an introspective way. And introspection is where emotional interest begins to deepen. Now here's the important part. This phrase is not an accusation. It should never sound like you're figuring her out or analyzing her like a puzzle. It should feel light, almost like you're noticing something quietly, without judgment. Because if it feels intense or interrogative, it creates distance instead of attraction. But when it's delivered calmly, it signals something very powerful. You're observant, you're not rushing, and you're paying attention beyond the obvious. That combination creates intrigue. And intrigue is one of the strongest emotional triggers in early attraction. Now let's go deeper into why this works. Most conversations stay at surface level. Jobs, hobbies, daily life, small stories. Comfortable but not memorable. But attraction often begins when someone feels seen beyond the surface, even slightly. Not exposed, not analyzed, just noticed. And this phrase does exactly that. It introduces the idea that there might be more to her than what she's currently showing, and people naturally want to be understood at a deeper level. But here's the psychological twist. It also positions you as someone who doesn't get overwhelmed by complexity. You're not trying to decode her, you're simply observing her calmly. That creates emotional safety and curiosity at the same time, and that combination is rare. Because most people lean too far in one direction, either too intense, which feels uncomfortable, or too casual, which feels forgettable. This sits in the middle. Now, one important warning. This phrase only works when your overall presence is grounded. If you're already coming across as needy or overly eager, it can feel off. But if your energy is relaxed, steady, and self-assured, it becomes a quiet invitation. An invitation for her to open up more, without feeling pushed. And that's where the dynamic begins to shift. Because once she starts revealing more of herself voluntarily, emotional investment begins to grow naturally, not forced, not manipulated, just human connection unfolding. And that brings us to the third phrase. The one that subtly shifts how she perceives your confidence and emotional stability in a very noticeable way. The third phrase is where most men either get it completely right or accidentally ruin the moment by overthinking it. Here it is. I'm not in a rush. Now this might sound like you're just talking about time, but emotionally it communicates something much bigger. It signals emotional stability, and in attraction, emotional stability is more powerful than intensity. Let me explain. Most interactions, especially in dating, carry hidden pressure. Even when nothing is being said out loud, there's often an underlying urgency. Does she like me? Is this going somewhere? Am I doing this right? Women can feel that pressure even when you think you're hiding it well, and pressure kills natural attraction faster than almost anything else. So when you say, I'm not in a rush, calmly and without expectation, it changes the emotional environment completely. It removes urgency from the interaction, and what replaces urgency is ease. Now, ease is powerful because it creates space for genuine feelings to develop. Think about it. When someone feels like they're being rushed, they become guarded. They start protecting themselves. They start evaluating instead of experiencing. But when someone feels there's no pressure, they relax. They open up more naturally. They speak more freely. They show more of themselves without realizing it. That's what this phrase unlocks. But there's a deeper layer here too. When you say, "I'm not in a rush," you're also communicating something about yourself, that you are not dependent on immediate validation or fast outcomes. That signals confidence. Not loud confidence, not arrogant confidence, but calm confidence. The kind that doesn't need to force outcomes because it trusts itself enough to let things develop naturally. And that is quietly attractive in a way people don't always consciously recognize. Now here's where many people misunderstand this idea. This is not about playing hard to get. It's not about pretending to be detached. It's about genuinely being okay with things unfolding at their own pace. Because when that mindset is real, it shows in everything. Your tone, your body language, your pauses, even your silence. And she feels it. Another important thing, this phrase also subtly reduces pressure on her side. Because when she realizes you're not rushing toward an outcome, she stops feeling like she has to make a quick decision about you. And that creates something very important in attraction: emotional breathing room. People reveal their true interest in spaces where they feel free, not pressured. So instead of pushing her closer, you're actually allowing her to come closer on her own terms. And that difference changes everything. Because attraction that is chosen always lasts longer than attraction that is forced. Now, if you've been paying attention, you might already see a pattern forming. None of these phrases are about impressing her. They're about removing pressure while quietly increasing emotional depth. And when you combine them, something interesting happens. Not instantly, but gradually. Let's put it together. First, "I like talking to you" creates simple emotional clarity. It shows interest without performance. Then, "I feel like you don't tell people everything about yourself" adds curiosity. It gently opens depth in the conversation. And finally, "I'm not in a rush" removes pressure and creates emotional safety. Now imagine these not as isolated lines, but as part of your overall communication style. What happens? The interaction starts to feel different from what she's used to. Most conversations follow a predictable pattern: small talk, subtle testing, pressure building, expectation forming. But this combination breaks that pattern. It creates something slower, calmer, and more emotionally spacious. And that space is where attraction often grows strongest, because in that space, she doesn't feel rushed to decide how she feels about you. She doesn't feel like she's being evaluated, and she doesn't feel like she has to perform either. Instead, she gets to experience the interaction, and experience is where emotion forms. Now here's something important that most people miss. These phrases don't make someone attracted to you. They simply reveal how you already show up. If your presence is anxious, no phrase will fix that. If your presence is grounded, these phrases will enhance it. That's why they're often misunderstood. People think they are tools, but they're actually reflections. They reflect emotional maturity or lack of it. For example, if you say, "I'm not in a rush," but your behavior shows impatience, she will notice the mismatch. If you say, "I like talking to you," but your energy feels uncertain, it won't land the same way. But when your words and energy align, something subtle happens. You become easier to be around, not because you're trying harder, but because you're not creating unnecessary emotional tension. And in modern dating, that alone stands out more than most people realize. Because a lot of interactions today are either too intense too fast or too emotionally empty. Very few sit in that calm middle space where connection actually builds naturally. That's why this approach feels different. Not louder, not more dramatic, just more grounded. And grounded energy is often what allows attraction to develop without forcing it. Here's where we need to clear up something important, because this is where most men completely misunderstand attraction psychology. They think it's about finding the right words and then using them like switches to trigger a response. But human connection doesn't work like that. People aren't programmed machines. They're emotionally responsive, constantly reading tone, timing, intention, and consistency. So if you try to use phrases like tools as tricks to get a reaction, it backfires, even if the words are correct. Because intention always leaks through, and she feels it. That's why two people can say the exact same sentence, and it lands completely differently depending on who says it and how they are being. Now let's talk about the biggest mistake: over-managing your communication. When someone becomes too focused on saying the perfect thing, they stop being present. They start thinking instead of connecting. And when you're in your head, you're not truly in the moment with the other person. That absence is noticeable. On the other hand, when someone is present, calm, and emotionally steady, even simple words carry weight. That's the real psychology behind attraction: presence, not performance. Another mistake is trying to accelerate emotional outcomes. Some people use phrases like these hoping to create instant chemistry or immediate emotional shift. But real attraction doesn't work in spikes. It builds in layers. It starts with comfort, then curiosity, then emotional familiarity. Then interest deepens over time. If you try to skip those layers, it often creates resistance instead of attraction. So the goal is never to trigger someone. The goal is to create an environment where genuine connection can develop naturally. Now here's the part that ties everything together. The three phrases we discussed are not magic spells. They are expressions of a mindset of calm interest, emotional awareness, and patience. I like talking to you equals honesty without pressure. I feel like you don't tell people everything about yourself equals curiosity without judgment. I'm not in a rush equals confidence without urgency. When these qualities are real in you, your communication becomes naturally more attractive, not because you're doing something extra, but because you're not doing what most people do: overreacting, over-pursuing, or overthinking. And here's something worth remembering. The strongest form of attraction is not created by chasing attention. It's created when someone feels emotionally safe enough to lean in and curious enough to stay. That balance is what makes someone want to know you more, not because you convince them, but because being around you feels different, calmer, clearer, more real. And in a world where most interactions feel rushed or shallow, that difference is often what stands out the most. So instead of focusing on what to say next, the deeper question is this: how do you show up when nothing is being forced? Because that is what people remember long after the conversation ends.